Good afternoon and welcome to the May 8th edition of the Gold, Goats, and Gun Short News. My name is Tom Luongo. We've got a lot to talk about today, and today I want to talk about, is the possibility of war with Iran inevitable at this point? As we filter in and wait for people to filter into the stream, let's get some stuff out of the way. I'd like everybody to take a real close look at the Brave browser as a way to connect directly with publishers and content consumers who while you browse, you get paid to watch, you get paid to look at ads, and then you can distribute those rewards that you get out to your favorite publishers. I think that's an incredibly good system for breaking the control of the advertising platforms and the now big tech censoring artists like Facebook and Google and the rest of them. So as we go along there, I'm a member, and I recommend that all of you recommend to your favorite content creators that you do the same thing. All right. You can also follow my work on Twitter at TFL1728, and also you can follow my blog at tomluongo.me. All the links are down below. And if this is your first time watching, please give a like and subscribe down below, and bang the bell button for notifications when I go live. We do this every Monday night at 8 p.m. and every Friday night at 8:30. All right, let's get to it, shall we? So it was a year ago today when Donald Trump came out and decided not to play. I guess Iran sticking to their agreements doesn't impress him. The truth of the matter is that the JCPOA, and I really should have done a better, prepped a better Sgt. Pepper's riff on that. It was been going through my head for the last couple of days. I really should have done that, but I didn't. Okay, so the JCPOA died a year ago today, even though it's still technically in effect. And Trump is prepping a new round of sanctions on Iran. John Bolton is making unbelievably obnoxious comments about about what we're willing to do in response to anything Iran's going to do in response to this. We're prepping the narrative, obviously, that Iran is now angry with us for having done all this, and so that's the narrative they're running with, the moving the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group into the Persian Gulf and all of this stuff. And to be honest with you, all Iran has done in response is said, we're going to not do anything, really. The only thing they're going to continue to do is they're going to continue to stockpile heavy water, and because they're not even going to continue to sell it on the open market like they have been. They'll continue to stockpile it beyond the allowed limits of the deal, since the Americans are no longer honoring the deal and the Europeans are no longer attempting to even try and help mitigate the situation. The Europeans have been exposed here as useless opportunists who have zero interest in actually going against Trump's edicts here. So at the end of the day, while the EU drove, and the Obama administration drove the signing of the JCPOA originally, it was purely for as long as it benefited the EU more than it benefited anybody else. And they thought that they were going to get cheap access to cheap Iranian energy. And the minute it became hard, well, they're like, no, we don't need to do that because we're feckless and useless EU technocrats. So that's the situation on that front. I don't expect anything to happen. Iran's had very strong words for the EU for not trying to help mitigate the effects of these sanctions. They've had a year to come up with a way to get around the sanctions financially. They haven't really done so. They put together this special purpose vehicle called Instex, INSTEX, typical technocratic acronym, nonsense. And the terms of which are moronic, right? So it's a vehicle by which Iranian and European businesses could do business with one another, but the terms of the arrangement might as well have been written in Washington, and therefore it's going to be useless until the EU actually stands up to the US in some way. You can't expect anything out of them. So for now, Iran, all they will do is put the ball back in the Americans' court. by stockpiling heavy water and by not abiding by some of the voluntary things, the optional things in the JCPOA, Iran is daring the United States to continue to act unilaterally, while the United States is trying to goad Iran into a physical response. Now, I've been covering Iran and Russia via Syria for 5 years now. Okay? Yeah, close to 5 years now. And here's what I know. Every time the Americans try some ham-fisted provocation, and even major provocation, shooting down a Russian Elant plane in September of last year, arming, we've had rockets being fired and drones being dropped on the Russian airbase at Hemmen in Syria and Latakia for weeks now. The Russians have not taken the bait. Every time there's been a clear provocation, a clear moment where Iran and or Russia could respond to these stupid attacks, guess what? They haven't done so. They've given nobody any reason to be angry with them. And as a matter of fact, the more that they don't respond to these provocations, the angrier and the crazier Washington's rhetoric gets. And this is absolutely accelerated since John Bolton's been in the White House. Remember, John Bolton and Pompeo both were moved into the White House in late March of last year. By May 4th, or by mid-April, we had massive disruption in the aluminum markets because on a Sunday night, Trump announced he was sanctioning everybody who did any business whatsoever with Rusal. 2 weeks later, we were out of the JCPOA. A month and a half later, they were sabotaging Trump's summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un after Singapore. All they can do here is try and goad the other side into a retaliatory mechanism so that they can sell that to the American people. The funny part about all this is that at the end of the day, they still think these appearances matter. That we're not all so frickin' red-pilled that we don't see right through all of this stuff. Okay? The Israelis are putting out the garbage intelligence that Iran was going to strike here, and that's why we moved that's why the Americans had to move all these assets in. Mike Pompeo very publicly snubbed Angela Merkel to go to Iraq and try and cleave Iraq from Iran. Oh, by the way, very silently behind the scenes, no one talks about it, not in a headline anywhere. By the way, Iraq got a sanctions waiver for importing Iranian gas because Iraq could not possibly stop doing so. So what this has done is created crunch time for everybody, right? Trump and Bolton and Pompeo and the rest of them are ratcheting up tensions to their fever pitch. Remember, lurking in the background is Trump's deal of the century with respect to Israel, which is basically going to be, look, the Palestinians can all be, they can all be relocated to wherever we decide to, or they can be wiped out, because that's basically what the deal is going to wind up being. But everybody's going to be unhappy about some part of it, yeah, except for Bibi Netanyahu. So while this is all going on, so you have that in the background, and you know that that part of what this is about is trying to put as much pressure on Iran as possible. They figured by now they would be able to get Iran to the negotiating table. Hasn't worked. Never has worked. The terms of bringing Iran to the negotiating table, the 12 points that the Americans have published that they want Iran to abide by, basically say, give up your government, give up your sovereignty, and you can be let back into the world. No one is going to respond to that. Well, it's the same thing we've done to Venezuela. Give up your government, let us install a puppet, and we won't X, Y, and Z. Guess what? That's exactly how Trump is running the trade talks with China, though he'll never admit it. Everything I've seen from the trade talks in China, this is not a digression. This is further underscoring the point, is that the Trump administration, in their demands of China and what was written into the draft agreement, which the Chinese then turned around and redlined very assiduously, came back and redlined, and then sent back to the United States over the weekend, at which point Trump and Bolton lost their stack, and they said, okay, that's it, we're not having a deal anymore. All of those points where effectively the United States wants to reserve the right to tell China how to run their monetary policy, their fiscal policy, their currency, and to open up all their markets and their financial markets to Wall Street. No. How about no? So that's what's going on with China. That's why the tariffs are going to go in place, most likely go in place on Friday, because Trump has nowhere to back down from this. He either cuts a deal that saves face, which won't work, which he can't get done with the people that he's got in place, or the sanction or the tariffs go into place, at which point the Chinese put counter sanctions on, which will gut what's left of manufacturing here in the United States. It will gut what's left of our farming communities here in the United States. It already has. It will continue. It will get worse. And then they will substitute and they will devalue the yuan by 15%, thereby creating and likely sell a couple $100 billion worth of treasury bonds, maybe $100 billion worth of treasury bonds over the course of the next year. Why they will do this? To put pressure on and to force the dollar up. They actually want to force the dollar up because that will destroy they will destroy the fiscal position of the United States, who right now is running a $1.2 trillion deficit. It will put massive pressure on the leveraged loan market, the corporate, the junk bond corporate market, the junk corporate bond market, as well as the municipal bond market. Okay, as rates will then begin to rise alongside a rising dollar, because we've already seen the big move down in interest rates. Even if the Fed cuts rates here, we're not going to see the 10-year at 1%. You know, we may see the 10-year bond drop down as low as 2%, but then there's going to be a spike higher as everything, as risk off, as risk assets get completely redefined. So that's what they're playing for here. They honestly do think that they can scare the markets into a safe haven trade, which will bring all the money to us and bankrupt everybody else. And this is a very standard play that we run here. We throw out liquidity, dollar liquidity for years, make the dollar weak, and then we tighten up at the right moment when everybody's over-levered, and then they all crash. And that's what we think we're going to be able to do to China here. But China has managed this before, and they will manage it again. They've managed multiple shocks in the past. I know that we've seen, stories on Zero Hedge about how certain Chinese banks don't have any dollars, and there's honest to God dollar liquidity problems and all that stuff. That's fine. Sure. The Chinese have trillions of dollars to shore up certain banks. Okay? I'm not saying that the Chinese aren't going to get their hair mussed, but in the end, everybody is going to lose. Now, at the same time that this is all going on, what do we see in Syria? We see in Syria at the same time, we see the Russians and the Syrian Arab army, after 6 months of resupplying and restocking and getting allowing the troops to rest and get recharged, what do we see? After the last Astana meeting between Turkey, Syria, Russia, and China and Iran, Syria, Turkey, Iran, Russia, and China, after we saw that last meeting, didn't wind up with any kind of political roadmap for Syria going forward. But what it did do was galvanize, because we're seeing the effects of it now, galvanize that Turkey is going to allow the Russians and the Syrians to wipe out what's left of all the terrorists in Hama and Idlib. Which, by the way, was a red line for the United States not 9 months ago, back in September, when there were aircraft carriers off the and French frigates off the shore of Latakia to stop any kind of to stop that invasion. Well, got news for you. The airstrike started 3 days ago, and the Turkish army is now the enforcer of the demilitarization zones all around, ringing that area to not let these guys out. The Russians have the ultimate cauldron with which to bomb these guys back to the Stone Age and take them all out. Meaning and Qatar has removed their financial support of HTS and all the rest of them. So now the final move to wipe out the terrorist presence west of the Euphrates River in Syria will come to a conclusion over the course of the next few weeks. This is going to make Israel crazy. So all of this, these are counter moves, things that are happening here, and this is why Trump is putting the screws down on China for trade talks. All right? So I'm just reading a couple comments here before I go on to my next point. Stoyanovich reminds me, yes, but to go back to it, but Bolton and Pompeo are out there saying any attack by any Iranian ally makes Iran responsible. Well, that's nice. If Bolton and Pompeo want a war, then they're going to have to start it, is the point. And the United States needs to look like the good guy. I remind you all, especially my foreign my foreign audience, that I don't think you quite understand just how important it is, especially to Trump's base, his highly conscientious, quote unquote, flyover country conservative patriotic base. They feel very strongly, they are very susceptible to this, this humanitarian interventionism, both from the left and the right. And when it's just a naked war of aggression, it doesn't play well at all. At all. This is why they had to prep the narrative for 6 months that Maduro was, an evil socialist and all this. It still didn't work very well. And then we wound up with, the Bay of Fat Pigs. And to Eric over on Twitter, on YouTube, is saying that there's a good CNBC interview with Jeff Gundlach saying that the national debt is exploding. Exactly. Trump is running a $1.2 trillion deficit at a minimum. Okay? He's doing that at the same time. He's putting tremendous pressure on the dollar overseas. And he's creating incipient inflation here at home. And while GDP is hot, I agree, but it's easy to get high GDP. It's easy to get hot GDP. All you do is raise spending by 10%. It's not hard to get more. It's not hard to get better GDP by spending more, by having the government spend more money. So the Chinese are going to, in response to all this, they will devalue the yuan to offset the cost, the effects of the tariff. They did this last year. Remember, this time last year, the yuan was trading at about 6.2 to the dollar. Currently, it's trading at about 6.75. It's roughly a 10%. That's about an 8% devaluation. Well, guess what? If Trump raises tariffs by 15% on top of that, you're going to see the yuan rise another 10 to 12%. Book it. You can book the yuan trading at around 7.3. The market's gotten used to 6.7. Remember, it spiked to 7 last year. Zero hedge will be breathless at everything, that the Chinese banking system is falling apart and everything else. Chinese banking system has been falling apart since 2013 when I first started looking into it. Hasn't fallen apart yet, and it's not because the United States has been liquefying it. It's because China's trade is changing and has changed. We are no longer we are no longer so important to them. And what this will do, and what this will continue to do, is force a situation where where China's other trade partners will have to start saying, I don't need dollars anymore. And this will be the process by which the world begins to truly start to de-dollarize their trade. The foreign offshore debt that's denominated in dollars will either be paid off or defaulted on. This is what Trump is setting up with all this. And he doesn't see, I don't know that he sees this or not. I mean, if he thinks that we're going to not be hurt by this situation, he's out of his mind. If Steve Mnuchin is telling him that the Fed are telling him we've got this all ring fenced, we can handle it, they're out of their minds. So, getting back to what's the situation with Iran. So what Iran is doing here is very simply not taking the bait, putting the pressure on the European Union to actually stand up. And if they're not, then they're going to give the European Union every opportunity to allow the JCPOA to fail on its own. And Iran will be well within its rights to start abrogating whole swaths of the treaty, at which point the United States will then have to decide what they're going to do. And are they going to look like the naked aggressors here? And I'm telling you that we don't have the stomach for it. We don't like it. And we're not going to just, go along with it. And they're going to continue to play for time. The Russians and the Chinese it's crunch time for them as well. This is the moment where they decide whether or not Iran is important to them or not. Their alliance is fine. Their strategic partnership is fine. Now it's the question of, are they going to truly come together and help bail Iran out of this situation? Iran is taking all the flack. Much more flack than Russia is. Okay? They're taking much more flack. So now it's going to come down to whether or not the Chinese and the Russians are going to openly defy the U.S. on sanctions. The Russians can, because the Russians don't have any significant trade with the United States. There comes a point where all the Russians really have to do is, and they know this is why they won't do it. All they have to do is cut off all titanium, aluminum, and uranium sales to the United States. And things get really interesting really quickly. All right. Going back to what I said earlier about Israel and what Trump wants. All of this is coming to a head at the same time because Trump wants this Mideast peace deal. And he sees it as a cornerstone to his re-election campaign, that he can solve Middle East peace, right? But he's trying to do so in the most ridiculous way imaginable, by basically putting the screws to everyone and giving Israel everything it wants. And Israel's not stupid. They're going, yeah, okay, fine, give it to me. I'll take it. They're not dumb. Netanyahu's not stupid. He's gonna opportunistically take everything that Trump gives him. But if you look at it, that's on Trump's side of the equation. On the other side of the equation is China's Belt and Road Initiative, which the major forum happened over the weekend. 39 heads of state. And this wasn't even the main conference for the year. This was just a small forum, many of whom are from the European Union. If you don't think that behind the scenes the Chinese are putting pressure on the European Union to help Iran, this is what we're going to find out over the course of the next couple of weeks, couple of months, whether or not China and Russia are going to truly support Iran by creating. Well, they already created it. All they have to do is actually do it. All right. I saw a report this morning that the imports of Iranian oil in April were like at a freaking record level. They expanded, or they were enormous. Of course, they were preloading before, in case Trump didn't re-up the waivers, which was prudent. Kind of proof positive, actually, that the Chinese have a number of spies within the White House in some way. But the real question is going to come in May. If the Chinese don't import at least 600,000 barrels of oil in May, they're folding on that aspect of it. But they don't have to fold on trade, and they're not going to. There's no reason for the Chinese to fold on trade. We don't have a hand to play. We haven't had a hand to play. That's why we're here in May, when Trump was supposed to have done this in December, and then he was supposed to do so in March. He's like Theresa May. Well, no, we're really leaving on the 29th of March. No, it's going to be April 12th. No. It's pull the other leg. It plays Jingle Bells. So, the Chinese are committed on a 30-year plan for Belt and Road. with 160 countries involved. And Iran sits at the center, is the crossroads that links China with the rest of the world. That's why they've put so much money into Pakistan. That's why they put money into Iran. And that's why they put money into China and into Turkey. And so those are the three important countries, and they're the ones under the most stringent. Forget Venezuela. Venezuela's a basket case, relatively speaking. Turkey and Iran are the ones under the greatest stress from the United States. Turkey's getting, hybrid war attacked. The currency's getting crushed. Erdogan's rerunning the election in Ankara, because I'm sure that there was hinky stuff going on behind the scenes in the election. I'm sure we were involved in meddling in that election to ensure that Erdogan's AKP party lost. At this point in time, Turkey is being marked for what's the word I'm looking for? Balkanization, along with Syria, right? If we can get our way with Syria, Turkey is next. Why they haven't been thrown out of NATO at this point? We haven't thrown them out of NATO, and they haven't left NATO because they don't need to leave NATO at this point. But we haven't thrown them out yet because we know that presidents change. So, yeah, you got to remember that at the end of the day, the Liberty Cat is saying, she didn't realize that the Silk Roads were this important. Iran is incredibly important to the Silk Road project. That's why there's $60 billion going into Pakistan. There's why there's billions of dollars being spent, not only by Iran, but India. And I've covered this in my newsletter, and I've covered this in other articles as well, that India keeps getting sanctions waivers on doing business in Iran, like port upgrades and rail lines and all of this stuff, because we can't stop that. Or India just says, okay, that's enough. And then India then becomes a full-blown member of Belt and Road, makes up with Pakistan and China, and the whole thing collapses. As Modi has been playing the United States off of their enmity with China and Pakistan brilliantly. I'm not Modi's biggest fan, but I understand what he's been doing, and it's really very smart what he's been doing, which is he gets to very deftly keep his feet in both camps. Because you build parallel structures to China's Belt and Road Initiative by creating parallel infrastructure to the North-South Transport Corridor, which runs from St. Petersburg down to the Port of Gwadar. Not the Port of Gwadar. No, it's a different Iranian port, which is west of Chabahar, which is where and I can't remember the name of the other port. I'm very sorry. But it's the Indians who are upgrading the port of Chabahar, which is right on the Iranian side of the Iranian-Pakistani border, going straight north to Mashhad, and then building a rail line from there and then into Afghanistan, right? But that's not really part of the North-South Transport Corridor directly. The North-South Transport Corridor goes from Moscow through Azerbaijan, down the Caspian Sea to Iran, and then and straight down to Iran to the Indian Ocean. And there's a separate spur of that, which is actually technically under the North-South Transport Corridor, that is all being built by India in a kind of parallel process. But it all serves the same stuff, guys. The Americans are livid about about all of this stuff. It removes trade traffic through the Suez Canal, so that we can't control that. Yeah, it's just all of this stuff. So, and so Alex says that China might benefit more from a U.S. war with Iran. No, they really wouldn't, because disrupting trade. Alex Grant asked this question on YouTube. Disrupting trade and disrupting that infrastructure doesn't work for China. China wants to build a massive infrastructure to move goods across the entire region, and to bring Iran's 80 million people, Turkey's couple hundred million, link them with Pakistan's and India's 1.6 billion and the rest of it and then the rest of Europe. And all the rail lines and everything else, it all goes to Iran. The use of the Caspian Sea, all of it. So they don't benefit from a war with Iran because the Iranians are not standing in the way of Belt and Road being done. What's standing in the way of Belt and Road is the United States. So the United States isn't going to win a war with Iran short of nuking it and turning it into a parking lot. But if that happens, all bets are off about everything. And we're not having this conversation at that point because we have bigger problems. Good thing I have a 500 ml bottle of Lugol solution. That's all I have to tell you. So at the end of the day, I don't think war with Iran is inevitable. It's the question that I asked at the beginning of, on the front slide of this. Is war with Iran inevitable? I don't think so. But are conditions going to improve? Not while Trump is in the White House, not while Bolton is in the White House. Lugols, it's a 5% iodine solution for protecting your thyroid from radiation. Yeah. I knew that one would go over everybody's head. So look it up, dudes. Yeah, it's a Lugol solution. It's a 5% iodine solution. It's for protecting your thyroid. All right. Doesn't Israel have a port in Obor? Yeah. Well, no, the Chinese took over administration of an Israeli port. I was talking about this with Halsey last night. He's like, yeah, the Chinese run a lot of ports. They run 3 ports in California, for Christ's sake. It's not evident. I don't think it's either inevitable or imminent, Fresh Lemon, but it is possible that mistakes are made. So, and it is possible that the Saudis and the Israelis, as on edge as they are, because they really do feel like they are under imminent and existential threat, don't engineer a false flag to get us into war. That's the real big one. Ricardo Canon asks a bigger issue on YouTube. Asks, bigger issue, what about a war with China? Could China jump the gun and spring a surprise attack on what? On one of our ships in the South China Sea? That only ends one way. It ends with nukes lobbing. No one has. Does anybody have this? Do you really think anybody other than John Bolton has a stomach for this? I know Trump doesn't. That's why he was on the phone with Putin the other day. He was on the phone with Putin the other day to discuss how badly we fucked up in Venezuela. Part of the reason why I'm not really angry about what's happening here is because Trump called Putin the other day and then announced it to the world immediately. He didn't try to. They have conversations all the time that we don't know about. But him publicly stating, I was on the phone with Putin for an hour and a half, 3 days after the Bay of Fat Pigs. Against Taiwan. I know what's coming with Taiwan. And the United States is goading China on Taiwan as well, which is the reason why China is not going to back down on any kind of trade deal here. The United States is pushing China on every front in every way, and the Chinese are not going to lose face here by groveling to the United States. They're going to show up, they're going to restate their demands, and then they're going to go home. And then they're going to set their bond traders in the PBOC and their futures traders in the PBOC to work in the currency and gold markets. That you can bet on. I agree that Dunford needs to be removed. Stoyanovich, who's on DLive, says that we should get rid of that Dunford needs to be removed. He's supposed to retire in October. And I don't think Trump is going to invite him back after his term is up as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All right. That sounds like a stream. Guys, anybody have any other things you want to say before I leave? It's 35 minutes. I think I'm just about done. Hey, I even kept it relatively clean this afternoon. I actually tried really, really hard. So, I know donations on DLive are down because, the swear jar isn't getting filled today. But, kind of wanted to do it that way. Got 67 people watching on YouTube, some unknown number watching on DLive at the same time. You all have been great as always. If you are happy with what you heard today, if you're new to the channel, again, please give a like and subscribe down below. And tell everybody about the channel that you can. Also, download and install the Brave browser. Let's get that running, and tell all of your favorite content creators. I look around at all my favorite content creators, and the only one that's signed up with Brave is the Duran. I mean, I'm happy to give them money every month, but I'd like to give money to somebody else. I tried giving money to Suspicious Observers. He wouldn't take it. The hell's wrong with people? I'm offering you money. All right. So y'all take care. Y'all have a great afternoon. You be well. We'll talk soon. We'll talk on Friday night at 8:30. Be well. Keep your stick on the ice.